All right, so we're going to be looking at solution-focused conflict coaching. And basically
Are you recording?
am I recording? That is a great
You want to
question.
miss it.
I think it automatically
Auto
started recording
recording.
us.
Oh, okay. So
Okay,
sorry
sorry.
for those of you listening into the recording. A little slow to get started, but we're going now. Okay. So my hopes in the vein of solution-focused practice are that we're going to kind of look at how we can have a basic understanding of conflict and conflict coaching particularly. We're going to dive into using a tool that I work with that I find incredibly useful. I use it for basically everything I do. And then look at applying that tool to a specific scenario so we can see what it looks like in practice. And some of you might already be familiar with this tool. It's the Dialogic orientation quadrants. If that sounds foreign to you, you'll know about it soon. And if you're using it, amazing. I'd love to hear how you're using it. And hopefully I'll be able to present a way of using it that is new and interesting for you. So very briefly, conflict coaching's actually existed for over 20 years. And it came about at the intersection of executive coaching and conflict resolution. And it was basically developed because there was limited processes that offered people this one-on-one assistance. So it emerged to help with that, to help with the one-on-one, to prepare people for difficult conversations or mediations, arbitrations, to help people gain the knowledge and skills to engage in conflict constructively, to preempt unnecessary escalation, to help people regulate their emotions and manage the impact of conflict. So Mediators Beyond Borders defines it as assisting either individual or teams to work through a specific conflict or learn conflict resolution skills to be more effective at handling conflict in general. And that's basically what it's all about. So, one might wonder, like, what's the difference between regular coaching and conflict coaching? The way I see it, and the clients who come to me for conflict coaching or who are sent to me for conflict coaching, I see someone else is joining in. It's basically specific to helping people work through a conflict that they're preparing to have a conversation for, or specifically to gain the skills to be able to have those difficult conversations. So my hopes for today is that you will leave here feeling a little bit more comfortable, either helping your clients or facing into difficult conversations yourself, a little bit more competent, like learning a new tool or exploring a different way of using this tool if you already know it, and maybe curious about how this might be useful for you in the work that you're doing. So really quickly, why does this matter? Why is it important? I think it's pretty obvious, but I do know for the numbers people out there, it's pretty staggering, though not really surprising. As many as 85% of employees experience some kind of conflict. And what that ends up costing organizations. If anyone, I know a couple of people joined in are in HR, it's approximately 2.8 hours per week. This was a study of employees from across 9 different countries, and they averaged up to 3 hours of work time spent per week on conflict. And this number is really staggering, $359 billion in loss per year based on having to deal with conflict. Beyond that, we've got the consequences of conflict. So people leaving the organization, 81%. I see that a lot. We got a few more people joining in. Welcome to anyone who's joining here. Sickness or absences, people taking leave because they're feeling like the workplace is no longer healthy for them, insults, attacks, or someone being fired. And shockingly, and I guess not super surprisingly, only 12%, this is what they found in their research study, of employees have actually received formal training. So I'm going to dive a little bit into the problem of that, only to really show the effects that I see in the clients that I'm working with when people come to me, and I'm a visual person, so this is more the human side of things, is people experiencing conflict at work, especially, or at home, or in their community, within their family, they tend to get really defensive, on edge, reactive, and the trickle effect of that is quite toxic for the people around them, but also the blame and the shame that comes with that, people themselves, the embarrassment of behaving that way in front of colleagues. As a result, there's a lot of overwhelm, stress, people feel uncomfortable having to have these conversations, or uncomfortable having to encounter another person at work, feel like they're walking on eggshells. And then when there's nothing people feel they can do about it, or it continues for a really long time, they start to feel really stuck, really burnt out, really hopeless. And we can imagine how much that trickles also into the rest of their lives. Here's Teresa joining in. Hello, Teresa. I also work with families and family-owned businesses, and what I see a lot of is family estrangement. It's actually incredibly heartbreaking. So adult children who have stopped talking to their parents, siblings who have stopped talking to each other, who can't attend the same, family function anymore. And this is very personal to me because I also experienced family estrangement with my sister several years back at the height of the COVID lockdowns, when everyone was in kind of survival mode. And we had this one moment that just ignited out of nowhere. And it's taken us almost 2 years to get back on track with each other. Luckily, we did. But what was interesting about that for me was that during that time, especially, I was talking to so many people about it because it was consuming every waking moment. Not having my sister in my life for those few months. And what shocked me was everybody I spoke to had a story as well. They were like, oh my God, I haven't spoken to my sister in 3 years. And I was like, what? I had no idea. Or my brother hasn't spoken to my dad in a decade, and everyone started sharing these stories. And so I started getting really interested in this family estrangement, because I couldn't believe, first of all, how silent it is. I had not heard about, like, people who I really was close with, and I had no idea that they hadn't spoken to their sister in 3 years. And some really heartbreaking statistics that 1 in 4 people are estranged from at least one family member. So conflict coaching and mediation is very dear to my heart, because I do feel that it is just something that is so badly needed on so many levels, because the effects of not being able to have those conversations are devastating and can be very devastating. So pretty problem focused, and this is a solution focused conference. So I do want to kind of flip onto the solution focused perspective of all of this, because all of that, everything we just talked about, the hopelessness, the stuckness, everything that people are experiencing who are unable to move through conflict in a constructive way, there's also something really important that's emerging from that. And it's what people desperately want. And what I hear people want, the clients that come to me, is that they want hope. Hope has got to be the number one thing I hear people say. Usually it comes out in the form of, I just can't see how this will ever get better. Usually it comes out in the form of hopelessness. But what I hear they really want is some hope, some respect, autonomy, connection, to matter, to be seen, to be understood. Very encouragingly, 95% of people, this is in another really interesting study done on Canadian workplaces, 95% of people who receive conflict resolution training say it improved their work environment. And this is obviously subjective, but not fully subjective, because I do scale with my clients, and we always scale at the end of engagements. But every single person I have witnessed go through a conflict resolution process that I have had the honor of being part of has emerged feeling either more hopeful, connected, stronger in their relationships with each other, or clear. So it's really, really important work. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So really briefly, I like this graphic because it helps us kind of look at what's happening in conflict. So we have down here on this lower level, and this is from the Mediation Training Institute in Florida. And they've got lots of great tools for anyone who's interested in learning more about conflict coaching or mediation. And what they talk about is down here, we've got the blips. So these are the everyday minor annoyances that just need a reminder, so it's like, can you please, not send me 10 emails about this? One is enough. Or can we please end the meeting on time? Or can you please pick up those socks off the ground? Whatever it is, those minor annoyances that just need a reminder. But what happens as the conflict escalates is that these start becoming perpetual problems. So the reminder isn't enough. They're happening over and over again. And as they happen over and over again, frustration starts to build, respect and trust start to plummet. People start getting more emotionally reactive because they're frustrated or they're fed up. And then resentment starts to creep in. Usually this is when it starts being brought to people's attention, especially in the workplace. But unfortunately, it's not usually until it crosses over this threshold into crisis mode when it actually gets addressed. And that's when communication has shut down. People have become emotionally disengaged. They're very entrenched in their positions, are really stuck in their conflict stories, and it's usually consuming their thoughts. And once it's up here, it's exceedingly difficult to work with. And the reason why it gets up to here so easily is because we are particularly conflict avoidant, at least here in North America, especially in Canada. I can speak for that. I'd be curious to know in other cultures, but in studies done here in North America around conflict avoidance, how many people do you think, what percentage of people do you think avoid conflict if you had to guess? Pop it into the chat. Just gonna go back to see everyone's faces here. There's everybody. You got 90%, yeah. I think it's probably closer to 90%, 75, 50, 80, yeah, 99, probably. The research found 70%, which is still pretty staggering. And why? I mean, it's obvious, but it's uncomfortable. People are afraid of getting hurt or being rejected. And most of the time when people come to me, what they're saying is they just don't know where to even begin. It's been going on. It's gotten so bad. They just don't know where to begin or what to do. So if we look at that through a problem-focused lens, we've got the problems, the reasons why people are avoiding conflict. They're uncomfortable, they're afraid, they don't know where to begin, they don't know what to do. And if we really look at what's going on there and what's important to them from a solution-focused perspective, what we can see they want more of, or what's important to them, is they want to feel more comfortable, more confident, they want to know where to begin, and they want to know what to do. So that's what I want to dive into today in particular, is our job as helping professionals or as siblings or as parents or as human beings in a community is to either be equipped or help equip clients with the tools and insights needed to face into these difficult conversations, to expand the conflict stories and perspectives, to find new entry points into these conversations, and to engage in a solution-focused and constructive way. So, equip. So I made the 4 E's because I find it easy to really wrap my head around that way. So equip. So we're going to be looking at this tool that I find exceedingly useful. How many people have heard of the dialogic orientation quadrant. This is Dr. Haesun Moon's work. Pop it in the chat. Michelle's given a thumbs up. Yeah, Fiona. No, okay. Martin, no. Jay, no. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is your first time hearing of this. Kathy has. Excellent. And for those of you that have heard of it, how many of you actually use this in your work? Or have used it or have played around with it? You can just pop it in the chat there. I'm just curious to know because I find that really interesting. We don't know if we're kind of starting from scratch here. Want to, but not yet. Okay. Okay, great. So perfect. So, well, this is fantastic. If this is your first time hearing about it or you haven't used it yet, I hope this will be very useful for you because this tool is exceedingly useful for me. I'm not very good at following steps, but this tool, what it does for me is it provides a map or a lens that I can play around within, but I don't have to remember step by step what are you supposed to do next. It just kind of provides a framework through which I orient conversations with my clients. I use it even as a journaling tool. It's very, very useful. So this tool came about in Dr. Moon's research on analyzing what worked in coaching conversations. So what she was curious about in her research was, how do we know what we think works actually works? And it's rooted in the microanalysis of face-to-face dialogue, which looks at those moment-by-moment interactions and conversations and how conversations get co-constructed. And she analyzed hundreds, maybe more, maybe thousands of transcripts of actual coaching conversations to see what was happening and what was useful and what worked. And what she found was that there's a timeline to conversations. So there's things that happen in the past and that people talk about. So last week I went to the store, and there's things that people talk about in the future tense. So, you know, next weekend I'm really hoping to spend time with my family. And then she also found a vertical axis so that people will talk about things they want more of. This used to be called positive content. She's changed the wording a bit because it's not qualitative. It's not whether it's good or bad, but it's that people will say, they'll talk about things that they want more of, and they'll talk about things they want less of. And when we put those two axes together, we get these 4 quadrants here. So quadrant 1 is what people say they want more of in the future tense. So especially for those of you that have never seen this before, what would you think? There's a name for each of the quadrants. What would you call quadrant 1?
Preferred future.
Preferred future. Perfect. Yeah. And that's exactly what it's called. Nancy's entering in here. Welcome, Nancy. Yep, that's right. Preferred future. So what people want more of. Quadrant 2, this is the positive past, what people want more of or say they want more of in the past tense. It's a little trickier because the wording is a bit strange, but basically the positive past. What would you call that? Type it in the chat or call it out if you want to unmic. Successful past. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great name for it. Haesun calls it the resourceful past. So that's everything that the client brings with them that's already working well, their strengths, their resources, their tools, their people that help. Quadrant 3, we're looking at want less of, the things people want less of, so the negative content in the past tense. What would you call that? Jay, I see you thinking.
It sounds like the problem, but that's present.
Ah, so yes, it's actually, I call it the problematic past. Haesun calls
Oh,
it the troubled past.
oh,
I like the double P. So yeah, the troubled past, exactly. So that's everything that's gone wrong, what's not working, why it's so bad, all the things. Oh, we got some more people coming in here. That are not working. So usually when people are walking in and they're dealing with a conflict, where do you think they are absolutely stuck in cement shoes? It's full blown quadrant 3. And then we have the last one, which is quadrant 4. And what do you think that would be called?
Dreaded future.
Yeah, dreaded future for sure. I think she does call it dreaded future. I have fearful future. It's one or the other, and I think it's kind of changed over the years as well. But yeah, the dreaded future. So the things that we are worried about, the things that are causing us anxiety, the things in the future that we don't want. And so what happens when it comes to conflict conversations and interpersonal conflict is that people have these conflict stories. And usually these conflict stories are building for a really, really long time. I have a new workplace that I'm working with, and the conflict that they are finally moving into coaching and mediation over started 15 years ago. 15 years ago. I couldn't believe it. I was, wow. It's amazing that they're finally doing something about it. But it's, if you think about the story that has developed for the last 15 years for them to get to this point, it's pretty entrenched, right? So here's some examples of conflict stories I hear when I get a new contract or new client comes to me. And these are actual examples of what people have come to me with. So he has no self-awareness and it causes such a toxic workplace. She's meek and timid and never says what's wrong. He's a narcissist. He only thinks about himself. They don't care about us and they never have. So usually those are the opening lines that I tend to hear, these conflict stories where people are feeling frustrated and angry, fed up. And when we plot those into the quadrants, we can see that they really tend to be in quadrant 3 and stuck in quadrant 3. So it's a little different from a normal coaching conversation. For those of you who do coaching or executive coaching, usually people show up very much in quadrant 1, not naturally, but usually there's something they want to work on. There's something they want better. When it comes to conflict coaching, people are often shown up very much entrenched in quadrant 3. They've been talking about this for a long time. They've been thinking about it for a long time. They've been talking to everybody else about it. Usually they're really embedded down in that troubled past and that problematic past story. And I find this really interesting. This is the authors of Crucial Conversations, which I'm sure you've heard of, and if you haven't, highly recommend. Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. And they talk about when a story has its grip on you, you're stuck in anger, self-justification, and blame. You're telling yourself the same story. You keep telling other people the same stories. You might have that person in your life that's frustrated about something that just keeps talking about it all the time, or you might experience yourself doing that. I certainly have. And you resist others' attempts to question your story. So what we want to do when we're working with people who are stuck in that quadrant 3 is we really want to help expand. And solution focused is so much about, it's about expanding and getting more details about what's important to someone, what's wanted, who's important to someone, what needs to be different. So how do we expand using the quadrants? So here's a current conflict that I'm working with. And it involves a team who have ended up in a really tough situation. This is the, sorry, I'm just going to move your faces closer to me so I can see you when I'm talking. I don't like talking just to the slide deck. This is a team at a hospital, It's a surgeon and a surgical nurse. They've been working together for almost 20 years. And that conflict pyramid, the bleeps were kept happening. It escalated up to those perpetual problems. And then there was this crucial sort of turning point where it hit that pinnacle up into crisis. And they were in the middle of an operation. It was the middle of the night, 2, 3 a.m. The client was put under, starting to bleed out. And the doctor called for the piece that they were using to put into the client to repair something on the client's body, and it wasn't there. They had the wrong one. So they had to call the whole thing off. They couldn't finish the operation. It was a huge disaster, having to talk to the client's family after that and explaining to the patient and their family what happened. And it just hit an absolute turning point where it flipped up into crisis mode. The doctor blamed the nurse blamed the doctor. It escalated, it ended up in a formal complaint being written against each other. And now the doctor and nurse are coming to me for conflict coaching to prepare for mediation. And this is what the doctor comes forward with. This is his conflict story. She's meek and timid. She never says what's wrong. I assume everything is fine. And then she goes and files a formal complaint against me. It's not my fault that she can't speak up. As far as I'm concerned, I didn't do anything wrong. If she has a problem with the way I communicate, she should have said something to me. So he is completely stuck in quadrant 3. So I see it as my job to help him expand the story so he can have more entry points into this conversation, because he's really stuck in that narrative. So as I'm listening to him, I'm hearing him also talking about quadrant 4, so that fearful future. He's worried that he's going to come across the wrong way because he has been told that he's too emotionally reactive and he can be rude and disrespectful. He's worried that their clients, their patients are going to suffer. He's worried that he won't know what's on her mind because she doesn't speak up, and he won't know when her behavior is bothering her, and obviously that he might lose his job. And what I find really interesting when I hear people complaining about what's worrying them and what the problem is that it's a direct line up into quadrant 1, which is that preferred future, what's important to them. So when I start getting curious about that, more information comes into the story, and the story starts to expand, and he starts talking about what he wants, what needs to be different in order for things to be better. He wants her to speak her mind. He wants to have a chance to explain to her that it wasn't personal the way that he reacted, and he'd like to apologize for making her feel that way. He wants a proper process in place so that things like this don't happen again, the mix-up on the equipment, because he started talking about the lack of process in place for getting the right equipment. And he wants them to be on the same side of the fence. He wants her to understand that it's the process and it's not personal. And then when we expand even further, so now the conflict story is starting to open up a bit. We're starting to get more perspective on it into the resourceful past. What's working, what's helpful, what strengths, what nuggets of resources might already exist to help them get to this preferred future. He starts telling me, well, actually, we've worked together successfully for 15 years. She's incredible at what she does. She's our best nurse. I have a ton of respect for her. And the conversation starts to really change. He says, we have this other colleague on our team who really helps her to understand my reactive personality, and that de-escalates things. What's better is that they've initiated this conflict resolution process. He said, honestly, I think we just need to be able to sit down over a coffee and talk, but there's never time for that. We have these crazy busy schedules. I probably only work with her twice a month. It's been escalated for years and years, but there's no process in place for us to sit down and dialogue with each other. So what's better is that they've initiated this conflict resolution process finally after 15 years. And at least they're starting to take things seriously. So now we have a lot more information about what's going on, which will give him more entry points into the conversation. So really, something I find really important to understand when it comes to conflict is that understanding must precede resolution. And one of the tools that I've started using that I find really helpful is, I don't actually know what it's officially called, but Caitlin's online here, and I believe she's been teaching about this tool as well. Caitlin, maybe you can help me out. Is there an official name for this 1, 2, 3 process? I tried to Google it, but I love the concept of it. Not that you know of. Yeah. So basically it's just remembering 1, 2, 3. So going through understanding from the first person, from their own perspective, from the other person's perspective, and then from the third person, the balcony view, the narrator perspective. So I'm not going to read this all out, but just to get a visual for how much more information you can get in that conflict story to expand that story, when you then walk through it from her perspective and his point of view, and from the third person's perspective, now we have a much bigger story. So the next step is, how do we enter into that conversation? How do we prepare our clients or ourselves to start that conversation? Because now we've expanded the story, we have a lot more information that we can work with, and we need to choose an entry point. This is one quote that I find really interesting. This is from the Gottman Institute down in the States, and they do a ton of research on relationship conflict. And they found in their research that the first 3 minutes of a conflict conversation predicts with 96% accuracy how the rest of the conversation will go, which is pretty cool if you can get those first 3 minutes on the right track. Solution Focus is fantastic for this. I would be curious to see what the research and microanalysis of face-to-face dialogue says about this, because I would like to imagine there's other opportunities in the conversation to reorient and change directions, but it's still really important to know from the perspective of, how are we beginning that conversation? Here's what's even more interesting is that it also predicts with 80% accuracy how the rest of the relationship will go 6 years down the road. So they can predict the patterns of the way people communicate with each other in those first 3 minutes on the effects of their relationship 6 years down the road. So coming back to the quadrants, the question is, what quadrant are you entering the conversation from? What door are you opening when you're beginning a conversation with someone that you have experienced tension or interpersonal conflict with? So when we look back at his initial conflict story, she never speaks up. She never told me anything was wrong. She's ruining my career because she can't communicate. And that was his story, and he was stuck in that story. Here's how he would have probably entered that conversation. Straight out of quadrant 3. You. Lots of finger pointing, lots of shaming, lots of blaming. You never speak your mind. You never told me anything was wrong. Then you go and file a formal complaint against me. You're going to ruin my career because you can't speak up. And I'm a visual person. What's that going to elicit? Probably not a very good reaction on her part. Maybe worse, a further shutting down and disengagement. And once that dialogue door shuts down, it's really hard to come back from. But with the expanded story, now we have all these new possible entry points. We have all this new data that his clients, his patients are really important to him, to both of them, that he really wants to get middle management's buy-in to change the process around how they get their equipment ready for the operating room. That his other colleague is really helpful with both of them, that he kept saying, I just want us to get onto the same side of the fence. That was not part of his initial conflict story. That he wants to apologize to her, and that they've already worked together successfully for over 15 years. So what does the beginning of a conversation sound like with that information? It sounds maybe more something like this. We've worked together successfully for 15 years. You're fantastic at what you do. So this is pulling all that quadrant 2 information. I have a ton of respect for you. I'm worried This is actually quadrant 4, but I do find quadrant 4 can be very useful in explaining what's important to you. I'm worried I came across the wrong way and I'd like to apologize. I'm worried that the lack of process is making things worse. I would love it if we could get on the same side of the fence and see what we can do to fix that. That's where he was at after he gained more information from all the quadrants. And this was the entry point that he now wanted to take into the conversation. So a completely different conversation, I imagine, that would unfold from that starting point. So we expanded, we found the entry point, and then the next step is to engage, to prepare clients to engage in these conversations. If you're not there as a third-party facilitator, or yourself engaging in these conversations. And so using the quadrants is really helpful. But what I have found with clients is that they find it can be a bit much, especially if they've got a lot on their mind and their, emotions are heightened and they're feeling quite tense. So what I found quite useful is really just getting down to the essence of it. And that is focusing on what you want more of versus what you want less of. So the presence of something. So moving towards what you want as opposed to trying to move away from what you don't want in your conversations. Some people in the solution focused community who use the quadrants regularly have kind of developed a language about that, and we call it above the line and below the line talking. So it's become this language of above the line, below the line, or other solution focused practitioners I've heard refer to it as solution land or problem land. So taking the time to pause and notice, am I in solution land right now? Or am I in problem land? And where do I want to be in this conversation? And then another lens that I also see these two lands through is the connect and protect. So really getting down to the essentials of, am I feeling open to connect right now, to collaborate, to get curious, or I'm in shutdown protect mode, defending myself. And essentially what I've noticed is that when clients are able to kind of just keep those two lands in mind, it really helps them navigate those conversations more intentionally. And it makes a really big difference. So going back to that conflict pyramid, 69%, oh, we got someone joining in. 69% of interpersonal conflict falls into this category here of perpetual. What that means is the same problem is happening over and over and over again. Probably, I would imagine, because we tend to be conflict avoiders. So we're maybe not addressing it, or we're not addressing it constructively. And so it's continuing to happen. And the problem with that is it rises up. And once it crosses over this threshold into crisis mode, a lot of damage can be done. So I fundamentally believe that it is useful to look at, when we're working with our clients or our team or our children or our parents or whoever we are, facilitating some level of comfort around engaging in these really difficult conversations, is to help equip ourselves and the people we're working with the tools and insights to get more comfortable having difficult conversations, to expand the story and the perspectives, to be really intentional about what entry point we're choosing to enter that conflict conversation with, remembering those first 3 minutes, and then to engage and pay attention to where we are. Are we below the line? Are we above the line as we're co-constructing that conversation together? And I'll leave you with one last quote here, and then we have a little bit of time to just have a bit of a conversation if anyone's interested in that. Is, with all of that in mind, also to remember that we do not have to attend every argument we are invited to. Okay, I am going to stop share. Teresa, you're laughing. I love that quote. Yeah, so that was a lot of talking on my part, but I hope there was something useful in there. And I hope it wasn't going too fast either. I'm curious to know what resonates, what might be useful for the work that you're doing or for your own life. Yeah, any reflections? Feel free to unmic. Yeah, Teresa.
I really liked your work, Jessica, that you walked us through. I particularly like the quadrants and the resourceful past, preferred future, fearful future. I hadn't heard that before. That's new. And the problematic or troubled past. So I really like the expression too. Are you thinking above the line, below the line? These are some things that a client can visualize easily. Are you in solution land or problem land? And are you connecting or protecting? And I like also something that I've heard before, and that is, what steps can you do to create a new future together? What would you like from this other person? What are you willing to give to the other person to create that new future? So I really like this is really concrete. And for me, it's simple steps that you talked about today that I can use with my clients to move forward to help them through conflict. So thank you so much, Jessica.
Amazing, Teresa. That's great feedback. Thank you. Yeah, I find really just narrowing it down to the essence of noticing, am I in protect mode or am I in connect mode right now? And even prior to going into the conversation, noticing a lot of people are really in protect mode going into those conversations because they're tough to have. And so what helps to, maybe counterbalance that a bit with a bit more connect mode, and what difference does that make? Nilusha, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. Hi.
Yes, yes. Hi, Jessica. Yeah, I just joined in at sort of the tail end, so I just got the part where you were talking about the DOQ, and it's something I'm familiar with. And so, what resonates to your question is really just that, um, how you're describing things is very much in line with some of what we're doing in our organization, and using the DOQ, using solution focused principles um, to do some training around these principles, kind of across all different teams and across all different levels, leadership, frontline, etc. And we're noticing how that is supporting team cohesion, psychological safety within teams, and people are experiencing sort of the ability to navigate challenging situations together, right? So it really is, I've seen it, anecdotally, just sort of the difference that it makes, and you've just done such a beautiful job articulating that, at least the part that I caught just in terms of your descriptions. I was curious, the thing that I wasn't familiar with was that 1, 2, 3, the first person, second person, third person. And I was just curious, like, is that a model that you're using kind of in your own mind as you're supporting people to navigate conflict, or are you introducing that to them to think about the situation in that way?
It's such a great question. So both, and I would say, and the same with the quadrants too. Sometimes I won't introduce the quadrants at all. I'll just use them as a framework for what I'm curious about and how I construct the conversation. And
Yeah,
the same with the
same.
1, 2, 3. Sometimes I'll make it very explicit. I'll teach the quadrants. I'll get them to walk through it from their perspective. I'll get them to walk through it from the other person's perspective, and then from the balcony view perspective. It depends on the client. It depends how much time we have. Sometimes I'll just keep it in the back of my head as I'm constructing the conversation with them. So what do you think she wants different or more of? What do you think she would say is working well already, or whatever it may be, which quadrant I'm oriented towards and which perspective I'm oriented. I would say, if I were watching you guys when you
Okay.
meet for that conversation next week, what would I see, So it depends. Sometimes explicit,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just as a reference for myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And it sounds like the second person is very much in line with relationship questions, right? And solution focus. But I wasn't sure how you would word the third person. So thanks for that example.
Yeah, interesting. So yes, the relationship questions very much. You just moved around. There you are.
Yeah.
Um, after you take your hand down, it slides you to different
Oh, right.
relationship question. So what would she notice different about you if you were showing up to that conversation
Mm-hmm.
really ready to engage in a constructive way? Would be a relationship question.
Mm-hmm.
But then the perspective taking questions are slightly different and be like, how do you think, or what do you think that she really needs to see different in order for her to be able to move forward? So
Mm-hmm.
helping that person put themselves into the other person's perspective to see from their point of view. And I love those because I find oftentimes what they'll notice is, oh my God, we actually want the same thing. So what my quadrant one is, I want that process to get better. So we stop having these problems in the first place. And actually her quadrant one is the same. And we kind of saw ourselves against each other, but now, that shift to like, now we're against the problem. I mean, we don't necessarily want that either, but at least seeing that maybe they actually both want the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Fiona.
I think you actually answered. I was going to ask how you navigate between the quadrants. Is it just by asking questions to kind of head towards one quadrant over the other? But it sounds like it's a lot more intuitive and involved than that, and more flexible too. Like sometimes you're going to, as you said, you're going to explicitly lead them through each quadrant, and other times you just are kind of bopping around depending on kind of where the conversation leads you.
Yeah, sometimes I use it as a listening lens. So I'll take notes as I'm listening, and as I hear someone complaining, I'll write Q3, Q3, Q4, Q1, and then I'll look at my notes as I'm listening to them, and then I decide. There's a model in solution focus that those of you who are familiar would probably know this, and maybe not, but it's called listen, select, build, and it's about being really intentional about what we're listening for, what we're then selecting from what the person said. So are we selecting all the Q3 and Q4 data, or are we selecting that one nugget of, actually, we've worked together for 15 years and I have a ton of respect for, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. And then building on that, right? Or hearing that little nugget of Q1 that it usually comes after or before the but, right? Well, actually, I want to apologize, but she da 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 da, right? And so listening, they call it in mediation the conciliatory gestures. So those tiny gestures of conciliation, is that a word? Listening for those, it usually comes right before the but, and then selecting that and building on it. So, oh, okay, so interesting. So you said you want to apologize. Tell me more about that. And now we're talking a bit more about the quadrant one. Other time I've literally made like tape quadrants on the desk. I've made life-size quadrants on the floor. I've had people stand in the quadrants before and speak from different angles, listen from different angles. So I'll have one person stand up in quadrant 1 and listen to the person complain from quadrant 3. And their job is to listen for what they hear the person wants and what they hear is important to that person. So all different ways, like I just find it such a beautiful tool, but sometimes it's not explicit at all. It's just in my head. It helps me orient my listening. It helps me orient my questioning and my curiosities. And how are we doing for timing? Oh my gosh, it's 6:30. I see a couple of things in the chat. I wish I learned this 40 years ago. Where's Martin? Oh, he's gone. Oh, that's too bad. Oh, there you are. Hi. Oh, that's really nice to hear. It's pretty incredible. Haesun Moon is just a phenomenal practitioner, and her coming up with this tool has completely changed my practice. Yeah. I popped in the chat, I don't know if you see it or not, a PDF. I called it the Conflict Coaching Curiosities, and it's just the quadrant with some of the things I get curious about in each quadrant. To be able to work with all 4 quadrants in a solution-focused way. If that's useful, feel free to have a look. Leave whatever doesn't resonate. And, you know, please get in touch if there's anything you want to share. I'm on LinkedIn.